Okay, we're working on a 2005 Jeep Grand Cherokee with a 5.7 liter engine. We have a few things apart here. The air cleaner housing would sit in this area, but this being a speed density engine, we're not worried about inaccurate readings with the airbox missing. Let me get you a shot of the trouble code. We have a P0335 in memory crank position sensor circuit. This vehicle was towed to us. The history of this real fast was it was at a shop and it had both cam and crank sensors replaced, and they continue to have intermittent stalling and no restart conditions. So it's up to us to try to duplicate it. All right, what we've done so far in attempting to duplicate this is we've connected to the crank sensor signal, and we did that underneath the car. The crank sensor wiring runs down this way and goes on the passenger side underneath. We connected to that yesterday and we had a real good signal, tried to duplicate it, tried to wiggle the harness, had no luck at all. One of the things we did notice is the harness for the crank sensor runs up along the side of the engine block here behind the alternator, and the conduit is missing. So that is an area that we highly suspect a wiring problem in, and we attempted yesterday unsuccessfully to move the harness while we were watching the signal. We could not get it to drop out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to back probe this computer connector for both the cam and crank signals. We're going to run jumper wires inside the car. We're going to monitor these signals directly during a test drive and see if we can duplicate this condition. So next up, I'll get you a shot of our scope connections. Here, let me show you our connections here. What we had to do is disconnect the one connector. This is the C2 connector, and we had to take the cover off of the back side. And then what we did is we used the diagram, we looked at sequencing, and we found our cam and crank wires. The crank is a brown and the cam is a gray with a dark blue, and they're right next to each other. They're right here. And we're using some piercing tools in this case because we need to test drive it, and I do not want to lose connection with a T-pin and a jumper wire. So when we're done, we'll just put some liquid electrical tape over these little holes we put in the wire, and that will be fine. But I need this to be an accurate test. I can't have a dropout in a signal and be worried about my connection, so that's why we chose that method. As far as the test drive goes, I know it's not ideal to be driving a vehicle without this cover on, but again, this is a speed density engine. There's no mass airflow sensor. We do have the intake air temp sensor unplugged, but that won't affect how this vehicle runs as far as cam and crank and setting a crank fault code and the vehicle dying and not restarting. So I'm not worried about that. We're leaving this off because we suspect our problem is down in here. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. We're gonna go take this for a test drive now and hopefully we can duplicate it. Okay, so I'm doing a desktop recording on this test drive because glare on the screen is horrible, and I think this will be a lot better. Now, one of the things you'll notice about the signal is it looks pretty choppy. It's not real clear. I even have peak detect on, but that's partly because of my ground location. A sensor ground would have cleaned that up a lot more, but I think it's going to be good for what we're doing. Now, it looks like this desktop recording kind of slows this tool down a little bit. That's a little bit more of the waveform. I really want to stay zoomed in while we drive it. I'm just going to let you guys see this for a second. Pretty standard Chrysler design. If I pause that for a second, you'll see the crank from, actually you can't see where I'm pointing, can you? Right here, this upper portion to this upper portion, that'd be 360 of the crank. Mm-hmm. So I'm only looking at 360 right there, and you see all the signals. If I stop that, go up just a little bit more, now it's going to start looking pretty crappy, even with that peak detected. Again, I think has a lot to do with maybe my ground location, but let me pause that. And then if you look at, you know, top area here to here is 360, and then the next 360, so that'd be 720. If I put my cursors in there, it might be better. Show that. And this is all good for while we're waiting for this thing to die as we're talking. So there's 720. And you can see the cam's pretty elaborate on this. We have starting with cursor number 2 over here, you see the 3 pulses. So 3, 2, 2, 1, 3, 1, 1, 2. It's a pretty elaborate cam signal, and I believe this vehicle can actually run without the crank signal, but either way, it doesn't matter. That doesn't really fit the symptoms. Symptoms are that this thing's shutting off and not restarting. So enough talk, and I think from this point I'll just keep this recording. But remember, using the Veris, if we want detail and repetition, we need to stay zoomed in, and then what we'll do, we pause it and then we zoom out on the buffer to see the detail that we'll want to see. Now, I don't really need a ton of detail here, but so I may want to play with this 20 millisecond number. That's pretty decent amount of info at 20 milliseconds. I really think, though, to increase my buffer, I'm going to stay at this 100 millisecond number while we test drive this.
Are we test driving it?
Yep. Just we want to stay in the industrial park, because if this thing dies, we're going to be stranded for a little bit.
Okay. So highway?
No. We're going to stay like within 2 miles of the school.
Okay, so Ohio, got it. That's within 2 miles.
As you can see, as we're driving this,
Wow.
Go right. As you can see, as we're driving this, our frequency is changing. So that's going to be a factor as well.
I can't actually go out in this thing, but...
Road vibration, heat, that's what we need. Unfortunately, yesterday when we moved that wiring harness around, we didn't pay attention to where it was lying first, and we may have actually temporarily fixed this Jeep by moving that harness. These intermittent problems are difficult sometimes. One of the things about doing ones like this, we should do this. How's that? We'll do a dual screen. We're running out of road, just so you know. They've moved that down further, that's for sure. One of the things about doing vehicles like this, go down a little further and turn around in the dirt down there.
Okay.
Even though it says stop.
Well, part of the gate's open, so...
No trespassing. Just don't run over anything metal. Anyway, one of the things about these kind of vehicles is if you can't duplicate the problem, how are you going to fix it? You know, what would be your next call? We've put, there's a lot of good bumps there, huh? The garage has put cam and crank sensors in it already. We continue to set crank fault codes. We're gonna throw a computer at it? I don't think so. You know, this is one of those ones too, if we can't duplicate it, give it back to the customer. I'm not gonna own this vehicle. And by owning this vehicle, I'm saying, what happens if you put a part in it? As soon as you put a part in this car, you're gonna own it until you fix it. We don't wanna do that. There's times to say no. You know, hey, this might be the one. Or maybe what we end up doing with this Jeep is we put some conduit over the wiring that looks damaged, actually it doesn't look damaged, where the missing conduit is. And maybe we just simply put conduit over that wire harness and give it back to them and see what happens. You know, to get to that wiring, we looked at it, you have to disconnect the alternator, disconnect a few other things underneath just to pull that harness up to do any wiring repair in that area. So I don't know, we'll see. We're just going to do this same path a few times. I should have brought my other camera. Could have mounted it on the dash.
So go back down, you mean?
Yeah, we're just going to loop around and do the same thing. I don't want to be far from the school.
Okay, so we're going to take a trip to Montana on this thing.
Yeah, no. Turn around in this parking lot here.
A lot of bumpy roads out there. Actually, you could just go stay in Pittsburgh for those.
You don't mind your voice being on film, do you?
No.
You want to be on film, Mike?
I don't really
Can I film you driving?
Yeah, I don't care.
Can I?
Yeah, I don't care.
Sweet, I'll put you in the video. This is my student Mike. He's driving for me. How about you guys in the back? You want to be on film?
Yeah, why not?
Dave? Okay, then we got Chris back here. And let's see if I can get Dave. There's Dave. And so this is what we do here at Rosedale Tech, huh? Sometimes. This is no fun though. This kind of stuff, you know, intermittents are the hardest part about what we're gonna do. You guys go in the field, you get out there, this is when it's tough. But you know what? It isn't bad. You have a slow day, nothing else going on at the shop. You at least have a job to do. You know, go out on the test drive, take it to lunch with you, get some food, do whatever, make it happen.
You got some nice cars that you like.
I'll tell you what though, you get yourself in a busy shop and you got 5 other cars waiting for you that you're gonna make money on. You're gonna do your thing, what we're doing now, maybe for 10 minutes or so, and that's it. That's all you're gonna give it. If I was in the field, I'd have no problem at all putting some conduit around that wiring and giving it back to the customer and letting them drive it and doing it from that approach rather than wasting your time on the vehicle. We have someone going 2 miles an hour in front of us. Which one of you guys, hope it wasn't you, Chris, grabbed that arm? Look at the grease print on that. Did you do that?
Wasn't me. My hands are clean.
We need to clean that off before we give this back to this guy.
Ew.
Now it could have been like that when it got to us, but
Just to make sure.
yeah.
I know I'm the greasiest
I'll tell
one.
you this, the brakes are terrible.
Are they?
They're pulsating like no other.
These customers gonna wonder why he's got mud all over his truck. I'll tell him to watch the video.
I'll tell them Pat took it for a drive.
Yeah. Watch the video on Rosedale. He's gonna wonder why all this kid in my car.
So I think a lesson here too, again, is if you suspect you have a wiring harness problem in a specific area, the worst thing to do is to grab that harness and start moving it. First thing you want to do is eyeball the harness and exactly which wires are close to the metal. Take note of that. In fact, what I'll do is I'll grab a screwdriver and I'll push on that part of the harness, almost forcing that wire to touch the metal first before I would start moving the harness and wiggling it and trying to locate maybe where there's a problem on the harness itself, like a rub through part. But
That'd be like short to ground.
yep, that would be a short to ground. And man, I've seen them so small, Chris, where all you have is one little teeny tiny strand of wire. Yeah, let's do one more trip. One more teeny tiny strand of wire that's exposed and touching on that piece of metal that's causing your issue. And when it's that small of a rub through, you can understand as soon as you move that harness by hand, it might be days before that harness settles back in that same spot again. This is making me sick, looking through this camera and
He's waiting for you, Mike.
hey, let's film this guy. That's some of our diesel guys. This is our diesel building right here. We're driving past it. It's pretty nice, man. Have you guys been in there yet?
Mm-hmm. Some of the semis are pretty big. And those
the building's huge, man. They got a ton of stuff in our diesel building now.
Those crankshafts and the diesel trucks are like almost my height.
I'm seeing nothing in the signal. Now, what we could do with this signal is graph a frequency, but because it's an inconsistent signal, it'll show dropouts. Well, what will look like dropouts. I prefer just looking at the waveform. Yeah, you know, that's what's making me sick. I'm looking through the camera. On this loop, let's run it back up into the school. And then what I want to do with this is, I think we're going to do exactly what I said, which is we'll get a piece of conduit, we'll run it down over that harness, and we're going to give this thing back to this guy. Worst case scenario is he's going to have to bring it back. But I would rather do it like that than I would tell him to put an engine computer in it and on a gas, and only from the simple fact that the cam and crank sensors have already been done.
Here, floor it out of here, see if you get you.
No, don't floor it. Don't do that. And that's the other part when we're driving vehicles, guys. You know, as young guys like you guys are, you tend to want to lead foot it. You know, you want to break the vehicle. You want to make it happen, right? And so we tend to drive aggressively. Well, what I've learned over time is you have to know who the customer is. You know, if it's a little old lady or an older guy that's driving the vehicle, trust me, they're not lead footing it. And if you want to duplicate their symptom, you need to drive it like they would. How many lead foots do you see that have gray hair or have that Kleenex box in the back window? You know, you see a Kleenex box in the back window, that's a red flag. It's an older person, right? So you drive it like an older person. Keep that in mind. Duplicate the fault. Sometimes you got to duplicate the driver. You got two 12-inch subwoofers in the back. All right, maybe you can drive it a little more aggressively, right?
Yeah.
What should be like a small Mitsubishi Lancer thing? Well, subs in the back.
Yes.
All right, so we're coming up on our building here. Let you guys take a look at where we're at. And we'll get some other people on film. This is our main garage to get in. Just go slow, but I don't want to run anybody over. Pretty busy shop. Put it right next to our Lumina where we had it. This is my classroom here. The outside of my classroom. You guys don't get to see this out here too often. All right, cool. So what we're going to do is go under the hood, and we're going to put some conduit around that wiring harness, clear the trouble codes, and give this thing back to this guy. All right, so I've talked about this before, and I guess I got to show it. This is the stuff I'm using. It's called liquid tape. It's made by Performix. To be honest with you, I bought it because it was at Walmart and it was cheap. And this is what I've been using to fix holes in wires that I put in. It's definitely something we need to think about doing when we're working in the field, is to not leave gaping holes in wires when we're done, right? So, and it's not a big area. It's a pretty tiny hole to begin with. Let me get you a shot of how small this is. I can't even see it with my naked eye here, let alone on this 2-inch camera screen. It's right where my finger, right here. Real tiny hole. So you open that for me and give me the brush, wipe the excess off. So this is all I'm gonna do.
Got it.
That's it. Let that dry. And we'll do the same thing with the other one, and we'll be fine with that. All right, so I don't know how well this video is going to help others with an issue with the Jeep, because we don't know right now if this is going to fix it, but I'll definitely keep you guys posted. I'll make an update on my Google Plus account. So if you guys aren't following me on Google Plus yet, you need to, because I can make posts on that. It's a little bit easier to communicate, and I'll update what we find with this Jeep here in a couple days. I'll put a post on Google Plus. But this harness in this area is where that conduit was damaged. So I have a piece, and what we're going to do is just slide it down onto that, and then I'll show you once I get it in there. The trick with this conduit is to get it started. And this thing's really hot. I might have to wait till this cools down some. Can't do it. I have to wait. It's too hot. Okay, to be clear, guys, I'm not calling this a fix. What I'm calling this would be a temporary fix. If this takes care of his problem, then the right fix is going to be to remove this alternator here and then remove the connectors underneath and pull the entire conduit up, the entire part of the harness up, and fix the parts that are damaged. I don't want to spend hours doing all of that just in case this harness is fine. And my suspicions again were down in here where you saw in the last couple of shots. In fact, I'll throw up a picture again here to show you what it looked like before. And you can see that this was all exposed. And now what I did is I just ran a piece of conduit down, and I made sure it went down all the way. And my main concern was that it was rubbing, the wires were rubbing right here on the corner of this bracket. Or is that part of the alternator? No, that's the alternator bracket right there. So with the conduit over top, that's going to prevent those wires from resting back in that area. And if his problem is fixed, then 100%, no question about it, that's where our problem was. And that'll make us feel a lot better about going in there and fixing it the right way. So that's going to be the temporary fix for now. And you know, if he calls us back and says, hey, my vehicle's still doing, you know, what it was doing before, then we're not going to worry about that area. And really, I think this is the best way to handle this right now. So again, I'll keep you guys updated. Look for a post on Google Plus, or if it ends up being a part 2 video, probably not. I really think this is going to take care of it. But I don't know, sometimes you have to know how to handle these intermittents, and I think that would be the lesson here.